I'm not sure why I'm telling this story now. Maybe because fall always brings it back. The sharp air, the smell of dry leaves, the way the light slants just so across the mountains. Or maybe it's because I've finally made peace with how things turned out. It all started with a phone call, just before the first snow. I was midway through revising renovation costs for a hotel project in downtown Denver when Mom rang. I expected her usual calm tone. Instead, she was crying. "The bank is threatening foreclosure, Emily," she said through choked breaths. Mom never cried. Not when Grandma passed. Not when I left for Chicago. If she was crying now, it meant things were truly falling apart. Funny how a single call, just a few words, can pull you out of your perfectly arranged life and send you chasing something you thought you'd outgrown. I told her I'd come. Not for glory, not to be the hero, just to help. Again. I left Denver the next morning, winding through the golden curves of Interstate 70. The air smelled of turning leaves and roadside coffee. NPR buzzed faintly about a virus in China. I turned it off. By early afternoon, Aspen greeted me like a memory I hadn't unpacked in years. Before going to the lodge, I stopped at Sage and Steam, the cafe my old friend Lily Chen had opened years ago. The bell above the door rang, and there she was. "You still take chai with oat milk?" she asked, handing me a to-go cup without skipping a beat. I smiled. "You remember." We chatted briefly. Lily filled me in on town gossip and the whispers about Heartwood Lodge. "People aren't thrilled with Olivia's leadership," she added carefully. That name, Olivia, hung between us. I hadn't spoken to my sister in months. We weren't exactly close, even before this. The lodge looked tired. The wooden sign out front was chipped, and the door creaked in protest as I stepped inside. The scent, stale coffee, dust, and something older, hit me hard. Inside, everything felt untouched since the late 90s. I wandered through the lobby, pausing when I spotted a faded photo near the front desk. It was me, maybe 10 years old, smiling beside a guest, holding out a room key. My first check-in. I remembered how proud I felt that day. I reached out and straightened the frame, fingertips lingering on the edge. "You came fast," said a voice behind me. I turned. Olivia stood there, flawless as ever, coffee in hand, that unreadable look on her face. "I always do," I replied quietly. Olivia didn't say anything after that, just took a slow sip of her coffee and disappeared into the hallway, heels clicking like punctuation. I stood in the lobby alone, framed by silence and the scent of old furniture. If neglect had a scent, it was mildew and burnt coffee filters. That was the welcome Heartwood gave me on my first full morning back. The front desk printer was jammed. The thermostat read 62 degrees. And the lobby chairs let out a tired sigh every time a guest sat down. I stood in the hallway just past the front desk, holding a clipboard and chewing the end of a pen cap like it could give me answers. The bones of the place were still good, but everything else, from the stained carpeting to the forgotten guest reviews online, screamed for attention. I remembered when Dad used to walk guests through the property like it was a national monument. He'd stop in the breakfast nook and gesture proudly. "We use fresh cinnamon in our oatmeal," he'd say, as if that were a game changer. Now even the pipes groaned when I ran the taps. I started where I always do. Lists. I broke the lodge into sections: front desk operations, online presence, housekeeping protocols, amenities, and assigned each one a letter grade. Spoiler, none scored above a C. For the next few weeks, I became a one-woman task force. I stayed up late replacing yellowed bulbs with LED soft white, rebooted the Wi-Fi router more times than I could count, and built a new booking system that didn't look like it belonged on a floppy disk. I even responded to old Yelp reviews personally, apologizing for sticky doorknobs and cold coffee from 2017. The staff didn't know what to make of me at first. Some thought I was a consultant, Others whispered that I was back temporarily. Only Linda, the head housekeeper, looked me straight in the eye when she handed me a set of spare keys. "Thought you were too fancy to scrub your own floors," she said. I smiled. "I still know how to hold a mop. It's like riding a bike." She didn't laugh, but she didn't look away either. Olivia dropped by occasionally, once with a vision board of neutral color palettes, another time with a glass of cucumber water and a passing comment about shifting the vibe. She offered no help, just opinions. "This logo feels tired," she said, squinting at the new website header I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. coding. "Maybe something more abstract?" I didn't answer. I just kept typing. To cope, I created small rituals. I brought fresh flowers into the lobby on Mondays. I played soft jazz on the lounge speakers after breakfast. I greeted guests by name when I could. Slowly, the place began to feel less forgotten. One Tuesday afternoon, a guest from San Diego left a 5-star review that ended with, "The charm is back." I read that line over and over, like it might patch something inside me. Later that week, Lily texted me a link to a Colorado travel blog. Heartwood Lodge was featured in a top 5 cozy stays for winter 2020 article. It wasn't the New York Times, but it was something. "Look at you," she wrote. "Still the quiet overachiever." At dinner that weekend, my parents set the table like they always had. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans. I sat across from Olivia, who was on her phone until the moment Mom brought out dessert. Dad raised his glass. "To Olivia's leadership vision," he said. Mom added, "She's bringing such fresh energy to the business." I blinked, my fork pausing midair. I had spent the last 6 weeks fixing toilets, training new front desk staff, and balancing spreadsheets that hadn't been touched since 2015. Olivia had been here, 3 afternoons? I didn't say anything. I just nodded and took another bite of mashed potatoes. They were lumpy, but familiar. Like most things in this house. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes. As I passed through the hallway, something caught my eye. A folded local newspaper on the entry table. A real estate ad was circled in blue pen. "Historic riverside property, prime location, ready for revival." I folded it shut and kept moving. I didn't bring it up again. Not that night, not the next day. But the words lingered. Olivia's leadership vision. Like dust that settled into the corners of my mind, impossible to ignore. So when Mom said, "We're naming Olivia the general manager," as she passed the dinner rolls across the table, it didn't feel like a surprise. Just a confirmation. I looked up from my plate, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. Dad avoided my gaze, eyes locked on his wine. Olivia sat across from me, calm and camera-ready, the corners of her mouth twitching in what might have been a smile, or just smug satisfaction. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe they meant something else. Assistant? Co-director? PR liaison? But no one corrected it. I began, and stopped. "I thought I gave up my career for this. I thought you promised me I'd be leading Heartwood." My resignation email to the Denver hotel chain had been careful, polite, full of optimism. "Returning to my roots," I had written. Dad had hugged me tight and said, "You'll be running the place in no time." Instead, I was running the laundry machine while Olivia ran press interviews she barely understood. "You're so detail-oriented," Mom added, as if it were a flaw. "That's why you're so valuable behind the scenes." I forced a smile. Of course. The next morning, the sun rose with more attitude than usual. I dressed in silence and walked into the lodge with a clipboard under one arm and an uncomfortable knot under my ribs. Staff were already gathered near the reception desk. Linda gave me a look, somewhere between curiosity and caution. I nodded and took my place along the wall as Olivia strutted in with a bright white blazer and slides that had never seen the inside of a service hallway. "Good morning, team," she beamed. "I just want to thank you all for believing in our new direction. I know change can feel scary, but I promise, we're building something beautiful." I waited for substance. Instead, she clicked to the next slide in her presentation. Heartwood 2.0. Beneath it, bullet points in pastel font. Streamline operations. Eliminate extras. Maximize guest impact. I didn't like the sound of eliminate extras, and I liked her next sentence even less. "We'll be phasing out the complimentary breakfast," Olivia said brightly, and replacing it with a paper plate brunch option on weekends. There was a pause in the room. Not dramatic, just the kind of pause that happens when a truth cracks. Linda's brow furrowed. A front desk clerk shifted her weight. I raised my hand. Our TripAdvisor ratings specifically mention the breakfast spread as a highlight. Cutting it could hurt our summer bookings. Olivia laughed lightly, like I had told a silly joke. "Numbers aren't everything, Em. They are when you're trying to pay the staff," I said, voice tighter than I meant. She didn't answer, just clicked to the next slide. I left the meeting feeling like I'd just watched someone repaint over years of work without asking what color it was. The hallway felt longer than usual as I walked to the back office. When I opened the door, my proposal folder, the one I'd worked on for weeks, was sitting on top of the trash bin. A sticky note stuck to the front in Olivia's handwriting. "Too traditional." I stared at it for a long moment, then carefully picked it up, dusted it off, and slid it into my tote bag. Not because I planned to reuse it, just because I refused to let it rot there. When I got back to my desk, Linda had left something by my keyboard. A ceramic mug, mine from years ago, and inside, a steaming cup of the exact chamomile blend I used to drink during late nights on budget planning. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. That evening, I drove home slower than usual, the road blurring in my periphery. As I rounded the bend near Pine Ridge, something caught my eye. An old wooden building with a sagging porch and a worn sign in the grass. "For sale," the red letters said, faded but still legible. "Riverside Inn." I didn't pull over, but I didn't stop thinking about it either. I kept driving, but something had already shifted. That faded for sale sign stayed with me. Quiet at first, like a whisper I couldn't quite make out. But whispers, if you let them grow, become decisions. I didn't tell anyone I put in an offer. Not Mom, not Dad, not even Lily. It was the first decision I'd made entirely for myself in years, and maybe the only one that ever felt completely mine. I remember once asking my parents to look over a college business plan I'd stayed up all night drafting. They laughed gently and said, "Sweetheart, you're overthinking it." That phrase followed me like a stubborn tune I couldn't get out of my head. This time, I wouldn't ask. The first time I stepped into the old Riverside Inn, it smelled like dust and disuse. Floorboards creaked beneath my boots, and the air inside had that damp quiet only abandoned buildings carry. But as I walked through each empty room, I didn't see what it was. I saw what it could become. Better light, clean lines, warm woods and deep blues. A scent in every hallway, cedar with a hint of citrus, subtle, but memorable. I imagined soft robes on every hook, fireplaces that actually worked, staff who felt empowered, not dismissed. I saw a future. It was foolish. It was impulsive. It was completely unlike me. So I did it anyway. I used the down payment I'd been saving for a home. Every emergency fund dollar, every vacation check I'd tucked away. I called the seller's agent the next morning, heart pounding like I was breaking into my own life. By the time the paperwork cleared, I had a key. A real one. I slid it onto my keyring beside the fob from my old Denver office. A place I'd once thought would define me. That night, I dropped the fob into a mason jar on my nightstand and labeled it with a sticky note. Things I gave up. I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting the silence acknowledge what I'd chosen. Lily noticed something different, even if I didn't say a word. One afternoon, as I picked up my usual iced coffee, she raised an eyebrow. "You're walking lighter," she said. "You finally fire your sister?" "Not yet," I smirked. I told her in pieces, small ones like stones across a stream. She didn't laugh. She didn't warn me I was being rash. She just pulled out her phone and said, "You need someone who knows plumbing." That's how I met Miguel Alvarez. Miguel was in his late 60s, with thick forearms, slow speech, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much and somehow softened because of it. He'd worked at Heartwood back when my grandfather ran the place. He remembered the old boiler and which windows stuck in winter. "You really bought Riverside?" he asked on our first walkthrough, stepping over a loose floorboard in what used to be the breakfast area. "I did," I said. "But don't worry, I'm not trying to turn it into an Instagram trap." Miguel chuckled. "Good. Place has bones, just needs someone who cares." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. The days were long. I worked mornings and afternoons at Heartwood like nothing had changed. Smiled at guests, reconciled receipts, bit my tongue every time Olivia used words like synergy and elevated experience. Then I'd head to Riverside with a thermos of coffee, a stack of graph paper, and a head full of ideas. I didn't tell the Heartwood staff what I was doing, not yet. I wasn't ready to answer their eyes. I sketched room layouts, studied scent psychology, tested towel textures. I kept a Pinterest board for branding, a spreadsheet for linen suppliers, and a small notebook where I wrote words I wanted guests to feel when they walked in. Welcomed, remembered, unrushed. Sometimes I'd sit in the empty lobby at night, barefoot on old carpet, imagining conversations that hadn't happened yet. I wanted this place to feel like a story guests were stepping into, and maybe, just maybe, like a story I was finally writing for myself. When I signed the final ownership paperwork, Miguel handed me the pen like it was a torch. The next morning I stood in the empty lobby, watching sunlight pour through the east windows. Linda brought over 2 mugs of coffee and handed me mine without a word. I took a sip. She had remembered I liked it with oat milk and no sugar. The phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mom." I hesitated, then answered. "Can you come by the house tonight?" she asked. I could hear clinking in the background, maybe dishes, maybe nerves. "Your sister needs help." She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. I never went. I thought about it, once, maybe twice, but I didn't go. And now, standing in this velvet chair with my name echoing across the gala hall, I knew why. They called my name, but I didn't move at first. My body stayed in the velvet chair, perfectly upright, while some quieter part of me stood back at the summit lobby, barefoot on tile, hands deep in a planter of rosemary, heart beating against possibility. Then Denise nudged me gently, and I blinked. I stood. Applause swelled around me, bright and blurry, as I made my way to the stage at the Colorado Hospitality Awards in downtown Denver. Best boutique hotel in Colorado. That's what the glass plaque would read. I hadn't let myself picture this moment. Not really. But now that it was here, it felt like arriving somewhere I'd been walking toward all along. When I reached the podium, I didn't have a speech, just a small breath and a full heart. "This means more than I can say," I began. But I didn't build the summit alone. Linda, Denise, Lily, my team is the reason people feel at home when they walk through our doors. We built this together. A pause. I smiled gently at the back of the room, where 2 familiar figures sat quietly. "It started," I added, "in a lobby my grandparents built. I didn't understand what hospitality meant back then, but now I know. It's not luxury or branding. It's how people feel when they leave. I stepped down to another wave of applause. It was warm, but it didn't define me. Mom once told me, "You don't need applause to do good work." She was right, but standing there, after years of being sidelined, the applause did feel like sunlight on a part of me that had long been kept in the shade. Later that evening, while the buzz of clinking glasses and polite laughter filled the room, I found a quiet corner near the dessert table. I was unwrapping a chocolate truffle when I saw them, Mom and Dad, standing just far enough to look like they weren't waiting, but close enough I knew they were. Mom stepped forward first. "You were wonderful up there," she said. Her voice was soft, maybe the softest it had ever been. "Thanks," I replied. She hesitated, then continued. "Olivia's having a hard time. The hotel's not doing well. She's struggling, Emily." Dad stood beside her, quiet but present. "We were wondering if you might be willing to just offer some guidance," Mom said. "You always had the better instincts." I looked at both of them, really looked. Their faces weren't the same as before. Time had softened the edges, added lines I hadn't noticed. "I already gave what I had to give," I said gently. "And I'm not angry anymore, but I've moved on." They didn't argue, they just nodded, slowly, like people finally learning how to let go. Back at the summit, the lobby glowed with soft string lights and the smell of rosemary from the garden wall. My team had surprised me with a toast, sparkling cider in mismatched glasses, music humming from the vintage record player in the corner. Linda stepped forward, holding a large, wrapped object. "We thought you should have this," she said. I tore back the paper, and there it was. The old armchair from Hartwood's front desk. Upholstered in deep forest green, wood polished to a soft gleam. "I saved it before they could toss it," she added. "Seemed like something worth keeping." I didn't say anything. I just sat down in it, cider in hand, the warmth of the room folding around me like a favorite blanket. Chatter buzzed, laughter echoed gently. Someone lit a candle near the guestbook table. Then, from the hallway, a small hand tugged at my sleeve. A girl, no older than 9, held up a folded note. I took it, opened it. "Thank you for the best night of my life. Maddie, room 103. My throat tightened. I tucked the note into my pocket, pressing it close. It wasn't applause, but it was enough.